There is a mountain in your life. You know it well. It's the reason you hesitate before chasing your dreams. It's the invisible weight that keeps you circling the same patterns, starting but never finishing, loving but never trusting, wanting more but settling for less. It's the quiet voice whispering, "What if you fail? What if you're not enough? What if it's safer to stay where you are?" That mountain isn't out there. It's not your job, your circumstances, or the people around you. The mountain is inside you. It's built from your fears, your doubts, your past wounds, and every belief that tells you to stay small. But here's the truth. The mountain is not there to block you. It's there to show you who you can become once you climb. This is the journey of The Mountain Is You, a journey of self-sabotage and self-mastery, of facing fear and finding freedom. It's not about waiting for the perfect moment. It's about realizing you are the moment. So take a deep breath, look up at the mountain, and step forward. Because everything you've been searching for is waiting on the other side of you. Chapter 1. Self-Sabotage. Imagine standing in front of a mountain. It's tall, rugged, and intimidating. You know that on the other side of this mountain is the life you've always dreamed of. Peace, confidence, freedom, maybe even success in the way you define it. Yet, instead of climbing, you find yourself circling the base of it. You make excuses. You start projects but never finish them. You set goals, but then procrastinate until they feel impossible. You tell yourself, maybe later, maybe when I'm ready, maybe when I've fixed myself first. That cycle, that invisible barrier that keeps us circling instead of climbing, is what Brianna Wiest calls self-sabotage. Self-sabotage isn't just about messing things up on purpose. It's more subtle. It's staying in a job that drains your soul because leaving feels uncertain. It's pushing away someone who genuinely cares for you because deep down, you don't believe you deserve love. It's procrastinating on a dream because failure feels scarier than standing still. We tend to think of sabotage as destruction, but often it's protection. It's our mind's attempt to shield us from pain, rejection, failure, disappointment, even if it means sacrificing progress. And here's the twist. Self-sabotage usually doesn't come from laziness or weakness. It comes from unmet needs. Think about it. If you've been craving safety your whole life, your brain might cling to comfort zones even when they're toxic. If you've longed for control, you might ruin good opportunities before they can ruin you first. If you've been told you're not enough, you might unconsciously prove that story right by shrinking when life invites you to grow. When I first reflected on this idea, I realized how often I've done it myself. I thought about the times I procrastinated on projects that mattered most to me. On the surface, it looked like poor discipline, but underneath, it was fear whispering, "If you don't try, you can't fail." Strange, isn't it? How we protect ourselves from the very thing we want. Self-sabotage is a mirror. It shows us the parts of ourselves that are hurting, the beliefs that still chain us, the old wounds we've never fully acknowledged. That's why the mountain feels so heavy. It isn't just stone and soil. It's made of fears, doubts, and years of unhealed stories. Here's a simple example. Imagine someone who desperately wants to be in a loving relationship. They meet someone kind, but instead of leaning in, they start picking fights, doubting intentions, testing loyalty. Why? Because deep down, they fear abandonment. Their sabotage isn't hatred of love. It's a misguided attempt to avoid pain. Better to destroy it early than risk being left later. But ironically, in trying to avoid heartbreak, they create it. And this pattern doesn't only apply to relationships. It shows up in careers, in health, in creativity. The writer who never finishes the book. The entrepreneur who keeps planning but never launches. The student who crams at the last minute, guaranteeing mediocre results, because at least then failure can be blamed on lack of time rather than lack of ability. Each case is self-sabotage wearing a different mask. So, what do we do with this mountain? The first step is to see it clearly. To name it. To admit, yes, I am getting in my own way. That honesty alone can feel like a relief, because once you realize it's you, you also realize it can be changed by you. But that doesn't mean bulldozing through with willpower alone. If sabotage is born from unmet needs, the solution is to meet those needs in healthier ways. For example, if your sabotage is rooted in fear of failure, you might need to reframe failure not as shame, but as feedback. If it comes from craving safety, maybe the path is building inner stability, so uncertainty doesn't feel like drowning. Think of self-sabotage as an old friend who's been trying to protect you with bad strategies. It's like a guard dog that barks at every shadow. You don't punish it. You train it. You teach it new cues. In the same way, you teach yourself new ways of coping, new ways of responding to fear, new ways of nurturing your own worth. I love how this chapter makes you pause and ask, where am I holding myself back, and why? Because once you see your patterns, you can begin to untangle them. It's not about shaming yourself for sabotaging. It's about understanding the logic behind it, even if that logic is outdated. Personally, this chapter reminded me of how often growth feels threatening. Not because success is bad, but because it forces us into the unknown. And the unknown can feel unsafe, even when it's filled with possibility. We sabotage because the brain would rather stay with familiar pain than risk unfamiliar freedom. But freedom is what we crave. And freedom is on the other side of the mountain. So, Chapter 1 sets the stage. The mountain is real, but it's not out there. It's inside us. It's the voice that says, "Don't try, you'll fail." It's the hesitation before sending the application, before saying yes, before chasing the dream. It's the shadow of old fears, whispering that safety is better than possibility. And yet, as Brianna Wiest gently but firmly reminds us, the mountain is you, and you are strong enough to climb it. Because here's the truth. Your sabotage is not proof that you're broken. It's proof that you're protecting yourself. But protection isn't the same as living. To climb the mountain, you'll need to trust that you can face the storms and still keep going. You'll need to believe that your future deserves a chance, even if your past was painful. And you'll need to remember, every time you stumble, that the mountain isn't there to stop you. It's there to show you who you can become once you rise. Chapter 2. Building Emotional Intelligence. Picture this. You're climbing that same mountain, and suddenly the weather changes. The sky darkens, winds whip across your face, and the path feels uncertain. You can't control the storm, but you can control how you walk through it. That control, the ability to navigate inner weather, to respond instead of react, is what we call emotional intelligence. In this chapter, Brianna Wiest suggests that self-sabotage doesn't vanish simply because we've named it. Awareness is powerful, but it isn't enough. To stop circling the mountain, we need tools to climb it. And emotional intelligence, the skill of understanding, managing, and channeling our emotions, becomes one of the most important ropes in our hands. At its core, emotional intelligence is about recognizing what we feel, why we feel it, and how to respond in a way that serves us instead of harms us. That sounds simple, but think of how often we do the opposite. Someone criticizes us, and we lash out instead of listening. A dream feels scary, so we procrastinate instead of preparing. An old memory resurfaces, and we numb ourselves instead of processing it. Each time, our emotions drive the car while we sit in the back seat. But emotional intelligence is about moving back into the driver's seat. Not by silencing emotions, that's suppression, but by hearing them, decoding them, and deciding what to do with them. I remember a personal moment when this clicked for me. I was working on a project I cared deeply about. Suddenly, I felt paralyzed. My chest was tight, my thoughts were racing. What if this fails? What if people laugh? What if I'm not good enough? In the past, I would have run from that feeling. Maybe binge-watch something, scroll endlessly, or convince myself the project didn't matter. But one day, I paused and asked, what is this anxiety really telling me? And the answer came quietly. You care. You want this to succeed. You're afraid because it matters. That shift, seeing anxiety not as an enemy but as a messenger, was the beginning of emotional intelligence for me. Emotions are data. Fear tells us where danger might be. Anger points to boundaries being crossed. Sadness shows us what we value. Even envy, a feeling we often shame, can highlight what we desire but haven't admitted. The problem isn't the emotion itself. The problem is when we misinterpret or overreact to it. Brianna Wiest argues that building emotional intelligence requires us to stop running from discomfort. Most sabotage happens because we can't tolerate the temporary pain of an emotion, so we avoid it. But that avoidance costs us long-term growth. Think about it. We procrastinate to avoid stress, but end up with bigger stress later. We avoid hard conversations to dodge conflict, but end up with broken relationships. We avoid risks to protect our ego, but end up with regret. The mountain teaches us that short-term discomfort often leads to long-term freedom, while short-term comfort often leads to long-term pain. Emotional intelligence is choosing the discomfort that leads upward, instead of the comfort that keeps us circling. Another key part of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. Imagine your emotions as weather patterns inside you. Without awareness, you're just tossed around by storms. With awareness, you can say, I see, this is fear, or this is grief, and then decide whether to carry an umbrella, seek shelter, or keep walking. Naming emotions is powerful. Studies show that labeling a feeling can reduce its intensity, like letting steam out of a boiling pot. But awareness alone isn't enough. Emotional intelligence also means self-regulation, choosing your response wisely. Instead of reacting with panic, you might breathe. Instead of shouting, you might step back and reflect. Instead of quitting, you might break the task into smaller steps. This doesn't mean denying emotions. It means guiding them. A skilled climber doesn't curse the wind. They adjust their footing. And here's something beautiful. Emotional intelligence doesn't just help us with ourselves. It also transforms how we relate to others. When we understand our own feelings, we grow in empathy. We start to see that others sabotage, lash out, or withdraw, not because they're cruel, but because they're hurting. This shift builds compassion. The mountain isn't just yours to climb. Everyone is climbing their own. Emotional intelligence lets us hike together with patience instead of judgment. Of course, this sounds neat in theory, but in practice, it's messy. Building emotional intelligence is like building a muscle. It requires practice, patience, and humility. Sometimes we'll still get swept away by emotions. Sometimes we'll still sabotage. But each time we pause, name, and redirect, we grow stronger. One exercise that resonates with me is sitting with the feeling. Instead of fleeing discomfort, you simply sit and observe. You might close your eyes, notice where it shows up in the body. A tight chest, a lump in the throat, a restless tapping of the foot. You breathe, you listen. You ask, what are you here to tell me? And often, the feeling softens once it's acknowledged. Another practice is reframing. Instead of saying, I'm terrified of failing, you might say, I'm excited because this matters. Fear and excitement feel similar in the body, racing heart, sweaty palms. But the story we attach changes everything. Emotional intelligence is about choosing the story that empowers rather than paralyzes. Personally, I think of this chapter as a gentle challenge. It asks, what if the next time you felt anxious, instead of distracting yourself, you got curious? What if the next time you felt angry, you asked what boundary was crossed? What if the next time you felt jealous, you saw it as a clue to your own desire? Suddenly, emotions become teachers, not enemies. And that changes the climb. Because the mountain will always throw storms, unexpected setbacks, criticisms, rejections, doubts. Without emotional intelligence, each storm knocks us down. With it, the storms become part of the training. They teach resilience, patience, courage. So, in Chapter 2, the invitation is clear. Learn the language of your emotions. Stop treating them as problems to escape, and start treating them as guides to understand. Emotional intelligence doesn't erase fear or pain, but it helps us carry them wisely, like tools in a backpack instead of weights dragging us down. By the end of this chapter, you can almost feel a shift. The mountain no longer seems impossible. Yes, it's steep, and yes, the weather is harsh, but you're no longer wandering blindly. You have awareness. You have tools. You have the ability to face what comes up inside you, instead of letting it derail you. And that skill, the quiet mastery of your own inner world, might be the most powerful climbing gear of all, because in the end, emotional intelligence isn't just about reaching the top of the mountain. It's about becoming the kind of person who can walk through storms with steadiness, who can face fear with curiosity, and who can feel deeply without being controlled by it. That's not just climbing, that's transformation. By the way, if you're enjoying this summary, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Chapter 3. Releasing the Past. When you begin climbing a mountain, one of the first things you notice is the weight on your back. The heavier the backpack, the harder every step feels. Many of us set out on our journeys with bags stuffed full of old pain, regrets, betrayals, mistakes, and stories we never let go of. And then we wonder why we're exhausted before we've even made progress. Chapter 3 is all about this truth. You cannot rise if you are still chained to the weight of your past. Releasing the past doesn't mean erasing it. It doesn't mean pretending it never happened or denying the scars it left. It means learning how to carry those memories differently so they no longer block the road ahead. Too often, we replay old stories like broken records. The relationship that ended badly, the job where we failed, the childhood moment when someone told us we weren't good enough. These memories start to define us. They whisper in our ears, "See, this is who you are. You're the one who was left. You're the one who failed. You're the one who never measures up." When those voices echo long enough, they become the soundtrack of our lives. And if we're not careful, they begin to dictate our choices. We turn down opportunities because they remind us of old failures. We avoid intimacy because it reminds us of old heartbreak. We hide our voices because once, long ago, someone laughed when we spoke. The past becomes not just a memory, but a prison. I once knew someone who always dreamed of starting a business. He had brilliant ideas, the kind that made your eyes light up when you heard them. But every time he thought about launching, he'd retreat. Why? Because years ago, he tried and failed. That failure had become a ghost that haunted every new attempt. He wasn't fighting the challenge in front of him. He was still fighting the ghost behind him. And that's what happens to so many of us. The mountain looks unclimbable not because of its size, but because we're dragging all the rocks of the past with us. Brianna Wiest reminds us that releasing the past requires both courage and compassion. Courage to face what happened instead of burying it. Compassion to forgive ourselves for being human. Sometimes the hardest forgiveness isn't toward others, it's toward ourselves. We hold on to shame like a punishment. If I keep remembering, maybe I'll never repeat it. But shame doesn't prevent repetition. It only deepens the wound. Think of it this way. The past is like an old injury. If we keep pressing on it, poking it, reopening the cut, it never heals. Healing comes when we clean it, bandage it, and give it space to close. The scar will always be there, but scars don't bleed. They remind us of survival, not defeat. Another layer of holding on to the past is attachment to identity. Sometimes we cling to old pain because it's become who we think we are. If you've always been the person who was betrayed, or the one who failed out of school, or the shy one who never speaks up, it can feel terrifying to release those labels. Who are you without them? It's strange, but the prison can start to feel like home. Letting go means stepping into the unknown, and that unknown can be scarier than staying stuck. I've noticed this in myself too. There were times I held on to hurt not because I wanted to, but because it was familiar. The anger or the sadness felt like a companion. Without it, I wasn't sure who I'd be. But the mountain doesn't ask us to abandon our identity. It asks us to expand it. To say, yes, that was part of my story, but it is not the whole story. So how do we actually release the past? It begins with acknowledgement. Pretending you're fine doesn't work. The more we repress, the more those memories leak out sideways, through sabotage, fear, or bitterness. Acknowledgement is looking directly at the wound and saying, yes, this hurt me. Yes, this shaped me, but it will not define me forever. Then comes forgiveness. Not always reconciliation. That's different. Forgiveness is about freeing yourself. It's about choosing not to let someone else's choices control your future. As Wiest points out, forgiveness is less about excusing the other person and more about liberating yourself from carrying their shadow. And finally, it requires creating new meaning. The past can't be erased, but it can be rewritten in the way we interpret it. That failed job? Maybe it was the push you needed to discover your true passion. That heartbreak? Maybe it opened your eyes to what real love should feel like. That rejection? Maybe it cleared the path for something greater. The story changes when we decide it wasn't just pain, but preparation. I love the metaphor Wiest uses throughout the book. The mountain is built of your past, but it's also the path forward. Every stone of regret or grief can either weigh you down or become a step upward. It depends on how you place it. Of course, releasing the past isn't a one-time event. It's not like dropping a suitcase and walking away. Sometimes you'll pick it back up without realizing it. Old memories will resurface. Old fears will whisper again. That's okay. Healing is cyclical. The important part is catching yourself, setting the weight down again, and reminding yourself, I am not that moment anymore. I am not stuck in that year, that room, that conversation. I am here, now, climbing. There's also something tender in realizing that the past version of you, the one who made mistakes, or stayed too long, or trusted the wrong person, wasn't a villain. They were doing the best they could with what they knew at the time. Holding compassion for that version of yourself is one of the most freeing acts of all. You don't need to punish them forever. You need to thank them for surviving, for carrying you to this point, and then gently let them rest. As I think about this chapter, I realize how often we confuse remembering with honoring. We think holding on to pain honors the seriousness of what happened. But in truth, the best way to honor the past is to build a better future. To let the lessons shape us, without letting the wounds stop us. So Chapter 3 is a release ceremony. It's standing at the foot of the mountain, opening your backpack, and deciding what you will no longer carry. It's saying goodbye to old identities, forgiving yourself for being human, reframing your scars as strength, and stepping forward lighter. Because the mountain ahead is steep, and you'll need all your energy for the climb. Carrying the past like a burden will only break you, but transforming it into wisdom, that will give you wings. Chapter 4, Building a New Future. When you've put down the weight of the past, something strange happens. Your hands feel empty. For years, you've been clutching old stories, old wounds, old identities. Releasing them is freeing, yes, but it can also feel unsettling. It's like standing on a mountainside where the path forks. Behind you is a trail you know well, familiar, predictable, even if it was painful. Ahead is a path shrouded in mist. You don't yet know where it leads. Chapter 4 is about this moment, the courage to stop looking back and begin shaping what comes next. Brianna Wiest reminds us that building a new future isn't about waiting for circumstances to change. It's about making choices today that slowly carve a different reality. The mountain won't move for you. You move on it. And that movement begins not with giant leaps, but with small, consistent steps. Think about how easy it is to get trapped in the belief that someday life will begin. Someday when I have more money. Someday when I feel confident. Someday when I find the right partner or the perfect job. But someday is just a mirage. The only real place to build a future is here, in this messy, imperfect present. When I first wrestled with this truth, it hit me hard. I realized how much of my life I had spent waiting to be ready, waiting for external permission, waiting until fear disappeared. But fear never vanishes completely. Readiness doesn't fall from the sky. If anything, waiting often becomes its own form of sabotage. The only way to create the future is to start, shaky, scared, and unfinished. Wiest suggests that building a new future begins with clarity. What do you truly want? Not what your parents wanted, not what society praises, not what you think looks impressive, but what actually lights your heart. Many people struggle here because we've been so conditioned to ignore our inner compass. We choose stability over passion, appearances over authenticity. But when we strip away the noise, the question remains, what kind of life feels worth climbing for? I once spoke with a woman who admitted she had everything she thought she wanted. A well-paying job, a respectable degree, a nice apartment, yet she felt hollow. Why? Because those weren't her dreams. They were borrowed expectations. Building a new future requires the honesty to ask, am I chasing what I want or what others told me I should want? Once clarity emerges, the next step is direction. And this is where people stumble, because they imagine the future must arrive all at once, like a lightning strike. In reality, futures are built brick by brick. Want to be a writer? Write a page today. Want to be healthier? Take a walk after dinner. Want deeper relationships? Make a phone call to someone who matters. Tiny actions, repeated daily, become the architecture of a life. One of my favorite metaphors from this chapter is the idea of planting seeds. Each choice you make is a seed for the future. Some seeds grow quickly, others take years. Some blossom into forests you never expected. But the point is to plant consistently, instead of standing in the field waiting for a tree to magically appear. Of course, when you start building a new future, resistance shows up. The old voices whisper, "Who are you to try? Haven't you failed before? Isn't it safer to stay where you are?" This is normal. In fact, resistance is a sign you're stepping beyond the comfort zone. If the path feels scary, it usually means it's alive. Wiest encourages us not to interpret fear as a stop sign, but as evidence that we're growing. I've noticed this myself. The first time I published something publicly, I was terrified. My hands shook, my stomach churned. Part of me wanted to delete it immediately, but once it was out there, the fear turned into exhilaration. Fear is often just excitement without breath. The more we step into it, the more it transforms into energy that propels us upward. Another key lesson in this chapter is about vision versus attachment. It's good to have a vision for the future, but don't cling to one rigid picture. Life rarely unfolds exactly as we imagine. If we're too attached, we risk missing better opportunities that show up disguised as detours. Building a new future requires both intention and flexibility, like climbing with a map, but also being willing to adjust when the terrain shifts. And here's something profound. The future isn't built only by adding new things. Sometimes it's built by subtraction, removing toxic relationships, cutting out habits that drain you, saying no to opportunities that look shiny but don't align with your values. Space itself is a powerful ingredient. When you clear out what doesn't serve you, you create room for what does. This chapter also emphasizes identity. To build a new future, you can't just change what you do. You need to shift who you believe you are. If you keep saying, "I'm just someone who procrastinates," or "I'm not a leader," or "I'll never be healthy," those identities quietly sabotage your progress. But if you begin to shift the story, "I'm becoming someone who finishes things," or "I'm learning to lead," the future starts to bend in that direction. Think of it like this. The mountain responds not just to your actions, but to the person you're becoming. And you become through practice. Every small decision is a vote for the future self you want to be. What strikes me most about this chapter is its sense of empowerment. The past may explain us, but it doesn't define us. The future isn't waiting to be discovered like buried treasure. It's something we create moment by moment. That realization can feel both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it means there's no one else to blame. Liberating because it means there's no one else holding us back either. So chapter 4 is less about grand inspiration and more about grounded action. It whispers, stop waiting, start planting, start climbing. The mountain doesn't demand perfection, it demands movement. One foot in front of the other, one day at a time. And here's the beauty. As you begin building a new future, you'll notice something shifting inside. The weight of the past no longer drags you backward. The fear of failure no longer paralyzes you. Instead, you feel momentum, small but real. And momentum is addictive. It carries you higher than you thought possible. By the end of this chapter, you can almost feel the air change. The mountain is still steep, but the horizon is clearer. You realize the summit isn't reached in a single climb. It's reached through daily choices, repeated faithfully. And each choice is building not just a future, but a version of yourself strong enough to live it. Because in the end, the mountain doesn't care about your dreams. It responds to your steps. And the only question that matters is, will you take the next one? Chapter 5. The Source of Self-Sabotage. By now, we've named the mountain, learned to listen to our emotions, and begun letting go of the past while sketching a vision for the future. But there's still something that lingers, something that pulls us backward like gravity. Why, even when we know better, do we keep tripping into the same patterns? Why, after promising ourselves we'll change, do we slip into procrastination, self-doubt, or destructive habits? Chapter 5 digs into this mystery, the true source of self-sabotage. Wiest explains that self-sabotage doesn't come from laziness or lack of discipline. It runs deeper. At its core, it's about misaligned needs, unhealed wounds, and subconscious patterns that we mistake for truth. In other words, sabotage is rarely the problem. It's the symptom. If you only fight the symptom, you'll keep losing. But if you trace it back to the root, you can finally set yourself free. Let's take an example. Imagine someone who constantly ruins healthy relationships. Every time things get close, they pull away, start arguments, or disappear. On the surface, it looks like they just don't want commitment. But if you dig deeper, maybe as a child they learned that love equals abandonment. That wound became a belief. If I love too deeply, I'll be left. Now every time love shows up, the subconscious panics. Sabotage is the brain's way of protecting them from repeating that old hurt, even though it ironically creates the very pain they fear. When I read this, it struck me. How often do we punish ourselves for patterns we don't even understand? We call ourselves weak or undisciplined, when in truth, we're replaying old lessons our brain absorbed long ago. The source of sabotage is not stupidity. It's pain trying to keep us safe. Another root of sabotage is comfort zones. The brain craves familiarity, even when it's unhealthy. If you grew up in chaos, peace might feel strange, so you stir drama without realizing why. If you grew up being told you weren't enough, success might feel uncomfortable, so you downplay yourself or avoid opportunities. Sabotage happens not because we want failure, but because failure feels familiar, and familiarity feels safe. Wiest makes a powerful point. The brain would rather live in predictable misery than unpredictable possibility. That's why so many people stay stuck in jobs they hate, relationships that hurt, or habits that numb them. The unknown feels scarier than the known, even when the known is killing them. The source of sabotage, then, is fear disguised as safety. I once had a friend who dreamed of being a musician. He had the talent, the drive, even the connections. Yet he always found reasons not to release his work. The mix isn't right. I need better equipment. The timing isn't good. Deep down, he wasn't lazy. He was terrified. Terrified that if he put his heart into the world and it failed, he'd lose the dream forever. So he sabotaged by waiting, and waiting, and waiting. His source wasn't lack of skill. It was fear of exposure. This chapter also dives into the role of belief systems. Every act of sabotage is fueled by a belief, often unconscious. I don't deserve love. I'll never be successful. People will always leave. These beliefs act like invisible scripts running the show. Until you identify and rewrite them, you'll keep repeating the same cycles, no matter how hard you try. Think of beliefs like the foundation of a house. If the foundation is cracked, no matter how beautifully you paint the walls or arrange the furniture, the house will collapse. Many of us try to fix sabotage by changing surface behaviors, waking up earlier, making to-do lists, reading productivity hacks. But if the belief underneath is, I'm not capable, those changes won't stick. To truly end sabotage, you have to dig into the foundation and pour something stronger. One of the hardest truths Wiest delivers is this. Sometimes, we sabotage because we secretly don't believe happiness is possible for us. We're more comfortable proving our doubts right than risking hope. Because hope is dangerous. Hope means vulnerability. And vulnerability means you could lose. So, to protect ourselves, we burn down the garden before anything has a chance to bloom. When I first sat with this, I felt a lump in my throat. How many times had I ruined something good just because I didn't believe I was allowed to keep it? How many times had I walked away before I could be rejected? How many times had I convinced myself I didn't care, when in truth, I cared so deeply, it terrified me? That's the cruel irony of sabotage. It doesn't come from apathy. It comes from caring too much, from fearing the loss so intensely that we destroy things before they can destroy us. The good news is that once you trace sabotage to its source, it loses some of its power. Like turning on a light in a dark room, suddenly the shadows aren't so scary. If you realize, I procrastinate not because I'm lazy, but because I'm afraid of failing, you can work with that fear instead of hating yourself. If you realize, I pick fights not because I'm cold, but because closeness scares me, you can learn to sit with that closeness instead of pushing it away. Wiest encourages us to practice radical honesty here. Not the harsh, judgmental kind, but the gentle, curious kind. Ask yourself, what do I really believe about myself? Where did that belief come from? Is it actually true, or just old programming? Most often, the belief isn't truth. It's a story written by pain. And stories can be rewritten. One exercise I love is journaling around the question, if I weren't afraid, what would I do differently? The answers that pour out often reveal the very places sabotage has been hiding. Another is to notice the secondary gain of sabotage. For example, procrastination might give you the temporary comfort of avoiding stress. Overeating might give you the comfort of soothing emotions. Recognizing that sabotage serves a purpose helps you replace it with healthier strategies, instead of simply trying to erase it. By the end of this chapter, the mountain looks different. You realize the obstacles you've been tripping on aren't random rocks. They're markers of old wounds, old beliefs, old fears. They're not proof you're broken. They're proof you're protecting yourself with outdated tools. And once you know the source, you can finally choose differently. Here's the takeaway that hit me hardest. Self-sabotage isn't the enemy. It's a signal. A signal that there's something inside you still asking to be healed. If you ignore it, you'll keep circling. But if you listen, if you dig deep enough, the very thing that held you back can become the key to your freedom. So, Chapter 5 leaves us with both a challenge and a gift. The challenge, to face our deepest fears and beliefs with honesty. The gift, to realize that once we name the source of sabotage, we are no longer its prisoner. We become its master. And step by step, the mountain begins to shrink. Chapter 6. Facing resistance and fear. Every climber eventually meets the storm. Up until now, maybe the trail was tough but manageable. You've carried the weight of your past. You've started shaping a new vision, and you've learned where sabotage hides. But just when you begin to make progress, something fierce rises up inside. Resistance. That invisible wall that makes simple tasks feel impossible. That voice that whispers, not today, maybe tomorrow. Who do you think you are? And beneath that resistance, like a shadow stretching across the mountain, lies fear. This chapter is raw because it names what so many of us don't want to admit. Fear never really goes away. We wait for courage to show up like a superhero, but the truth is, courage doesn't mean the absence of fear. Courage means feeling the fear fully, heart racing, palms sweating, voice trembling, and stepping anyway. Brianna Wiest paints resistance as both an enemy and a teacher. On the surface, it looks like procrastination, avoidance, endless excuses. But at its core, resistance shows us exactly where the treasure is buried. The things we fear most, resist most, are usually the things we care about most. If you feel massive resistance toward writing, maybe you're meant to write. If you resist intimacy, maybe it's because you long for connection more than anything. Resistance is a compass pointing toward the mountain peak. I remember when I tried to launch a project I'd dreamed of for years. The moment I sat down to start, resistance hit me like a tidal wave. Suddenly I was too tired, too busy, not in the mood. I told myself, I'll start next week when things calm down. But deep down, I knew Resistance wasn't proof I shouldn't do it. It was proof it mattered. If it didn't matter, resistance wouldn't care. Wiest suggests reframing fear not as a stop sign, but as a signpost. Fear says, here is the edge of your comfort zone. And what lives beyond the edge? Growth. Which means every time fear shows up, it's not blocking the path. It is the path. Here's the paradox. Most of us try to fight fear head-on, to eradicate it before moving forward. But fear doesn't dissolve through force. It shrinks through exposure. The more we face it in small steps, the less power it holds. It's like climbing into cold water, unbearable at first, but if you ease in, your body adjusts. Fear works the same way. And yet, the brain loves certainty. Fear thrives in uncertainty. That's why the unknown terrifies us. Starting a business, confessing love, moving cities. These are leaps into fog. The mind screams, what if it all goes wrong? But Wiest flips the question. What if it all goes right? We rarely ask that. Our brains are wired for survival, not happiness, so they assume the worst. But what if fear is simply your brain overestimating danger and underestimating your strength? There's a story I often return to about mountaineers. They say the scariest moment is not the climb itself, but the first step onto the rock face. Once you begin, your body finds its rhythm. Fear peaks before the action, not during, which means the cure for fear is often motion. Take one step, any step, and fear begins to loosen its grip. Resistance, too, is tricky. It disguises itself as rationality. I should wait until I'm more prepared, or now isn't the right time. Sometimes it even dresses as perfectionism. I can't release this until it's flawless. But all of these are just masks for the same truth. You're scared. And that's okay. Resistance means you're standing at the doorway of something meaningful. One practice Wiest recommends is breaking resistance into micro-actions. If writing a book feels impossible, write one sentence. If starting a business feels overwhelming, research for 15 minutes. If exercising feels daunting, put on your shoes and step outside. Small steps bypass resistance because the brain can't argue with them. Over time, those tiny steps stack into transformation. Another powerful reframe. Fear is not an obstacle to eliminate, but energy to harness. Fear floods the body with adrenaline, sharpens focus, quickens the heart. Those are the same ingredients as excitement. The only difference is the story we tell ourselves. Standing on stage, one person says, I'm terrified. Another says, I'm thrilled. Physiologically, their bodies feel the same. Emotional alchemy is about choosing the story that empowers you. For me, this chapter hit like a mirror. I realized how often I waited for fear to vanish before acting, not realizing that waiting was the sabotage. Fear is a sign you're alive, that you're pushing beyond the dull safety of routine. If you never feel fear, you're probably not climbing. And there's another truth here. Fear doesn't just signal danger, it signals transformation. Think back to moments in your life when you changed the most. Chances are, fear was right there beside you. The first time you loved deeply. The first time you spoke your truth. The first time you stepped into an unfamiliar world. Fear was not the enemy. It was the doorway. Wiest reminds us, resistance and fear are part of the process, not proof that you're failing. Too many people interpret resistance as a sign to stop. In reality, it's a sign you're close to something important. The mountain resists most at the steepest points. That's not the moment to quit. That's the moment to dig in. She also speaks about self-trust. Fear becomes paralyzing when you don't trust yourself to handle the outcome. But when you build trust, trust that you can survive rejection, trust that you can adapt to setbacks, trust that you can grow from mistakes, fear loses its claws. Because fear whispers, what if it's too much? And self-trust replies, whatever happens, I'll figure it out. I love this perspective because it shifts the focus. The goal isn't to eliminate fear, but to build so much trust in yourself that fear becomes background noise, like climbing with wind at your back, noticeable, but not enough to stop you. So how do we build that trust? By keeping small promises to ourselves, by following through, even when it's uncomfortable. Every time you show yourself, "I said I'd do this and I did," you lay another brick of self-trust. Over time, that foundation becomes unshakable. And from there, fear can howl, but it cannot move you. By the end of this chapter, you see fear differently. It's not the monster blocking the path. It's the trail marker saying, "This way leads to growth." Resistance is not proof you're weak. It's proof you're standing at the threshold of something real. The mountain will always test you with storms of fear and winds of resistance. But once you learn to face them, not with denial, but with curiosity and trust, you realize they aren't here to stop you. They're here to shape you, to carve resilience into your bones, courage into your voice, and determination into your steps. And perhaps the greatest revelation of all, the summit isn't a place without fear. The summit is the place where fear walks beside you, and you keep climbing anyway. Chapter 7. Transformation and Healing. There comes a point in every climb where you pause, turn around, and realize how far you've come. The air feels thinner, the view stretches wider, and even though the summit is still ahead, you can see the path below with new clarity. This is the moment of transformation. It doesn't happen all at once, like a thunderclap. It happens slowly, subtly, in the way your steps grow steadier, in the way you no longer flinch at every gust of wind. Chapter 7 is about this shift, the slow alchemy of turning wounds into wisdom, pain into power, and brokenness into beauty. Transformation isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more fully yourself, the version that's been waiting beneath the rubble of fear, shame, and self-sabotage. Healing isn't erasing the scars. It's learning how to live with them without letting them define you. Brianna Wiest begins by reminding us that healing often feels like breaking first. When you start to confront your pain, it can feel heavier than before. Old wounds resurface, long-buried emotions bubble up, and you might think, "Am I getting worse?" But this is the paradox of healing. You have to feel it to free it. Just like cleaning out a deep cut stings before it closes, emotional wounds sting when exposed. That discomfort isn't regression, it's progress. I've felt this myself. Times when I thought I was done with an old hurt, only for it to resurface when life pressed the same bruise. At first, I hated it. I thought healing meant never feeling the pain again. But eventually, I learned healing doesn't mean the absence of pain. It means the presence of resilience. The pain might whisper, but it no longer controls your choices. Transformation also means rewriting your relationship with struggle. Many of us believe struggle is punishment, that it's proof we're failing. But Wiest reframes it. Struggle is the chrysalis stage. The caterpillar has to break down completely before it becomes a butterfly. Likewise, our breakdowns often contain the raw material of breakthrough. The darkness isn't the end. It's the beginning of something new being born. Think of a time you faced a challenge that nearly broke you. Maybe a heartbreak, a loss, a betrayal. In the moment, it felt unbearable. But looking back, you may realize that's when you grew most. You learned boundaries, you discovered strength, you found empathy you never had before. Transformation rarely happens in comfort. It happens in the fire. Healing means choosing to see the fire not just as destruction, but as purification. Another theme of this chapter is self-compassion. You can't bully yourself into healing. Too many people try. They say, "I should be over this by now. I should be stronger." But shame slows healing, just as surely as dirt infects a wound. Self-compassion is the salve. It's sitting with your pain and saying, "It's okay. You're human. You're learning. I forgive you." That gentleness creates the safety needed for true transformation to unfold. And yet, transformation isn't only inward. As you heal, your outer life begins to shift. Toxic relationships lose their grip because you no longer tolerate them. Old habits fall away because they no longer fit the person you're becoming. New opportunities emerge because you carry yourself differently. It's not magic, it's alignment. When your inner world heals, your outer world rearranges to match it. I once heard a phrase, "When you change, the people around you will either level up with you or fall away." That's exactly what happens in transformation. Healing may cost you certain relationships or environments, but it gifts you the space to attract what truly belongs. Wiest also emphasizes the importance of integration. Healing isn't about cutting off parts of yourself. It's about bringing them together. The fearful child inside you, the reckless teenager, the wounded adult, they all have a voice. Transformation is letting each part be seen and heard, then guiding them with the wisdom of who you are now. Instead of silencing your past selves, you embrace them, and in doing so, you become whole. One practice she suggests is dialoguing with your pain, literally asking, "What are you trying to teach me?" Maybe anger says, "You deserve respect." Maybe sadness says, "You loved deeply." Maybe fear says, "You're stepping into the unknown." By listening, you transform enemies into allies. The mountain stops being a battlefield and becomes a classroom. Healing also requires patience. In our culture of quick fixes, we want transformation to be instant. But real healing takes time. Just as a broken bone needs weeks to knit, the heart needs time to relearn trust, and the mind needs time to rewire beliefs. Rushing only deepens the fracture. Transformation is less like flipping a switch and more like tending a garden. Consistent care, even when you don't yet see sprouts. For me, the most moving part of this chapter is the idea that transformation isn't about perfection. It's about wholeness. Perfection says, "I must erase my flaws." Wholeness says, "I embrace all of me, the scars, the lessons, the light, the shadow." The mountain doesn't ask you to be flawless. It asks you to be authentic, to climb not as an idealized version of yourself, but as the real you, step by step. By the end of this chapter, you realize transformation isn't a future destination. It's already happening in every choice you make to face pain instead of fleeing it, to forgive instead of resent, to rise instead of retreat. Healing isn't the summit, it's the path itself. Every step upward is a piece of you becoming more whole. And perhaps the most beautiful realization of all, your mountain was never just an obstacle. It was the forge where your truest self could be shaped. Without it, you might never have discovered your strength, your depth, your compassion. The mountain isn't just something you climb, it's something that transforms you, until one day, you look back and realize, you are no longer the same person who began at its base. Chapter 8. Becoming who you're meant to be. Imagine standing near the top of the mountain. The climb has been long, brutal at times, filled with storms of fear, echoes of the past, and the heavy weight of self-doubt. But as the air thins and the horizon stretches in every direction, something shifts inside you. You begin to see not just the path you've taken, but the person you've become while walking it. This, Brianna Wiest says, is the final stage. Not just healing, not just surviving, but becoming who you were always meant to be. This chapter isn't about a finish line. It's not about arriving at some perfect version of life where fear never exists and pain never touches you again. Instead, it's about alignment. It's about stripping away everything false, everything borrowed, everything rooted in fear, until what remains is the most authentic expression of you. The mountain wasn't there to keep you from yourself. It was there to deliver you to yourself. Wiest begins by pointing out how easy it is to live half asleep, chasing roles or expectations handed to us by others. We become the dutiful child, the successful professional, the strong one, the caretaker. We perform these identities so long that we forget to ask, who am I beneath all this? Who am I when no one is watching? Climbing the mountain forces you to face those questions. Because on the mountain, masks don't survive. When fear strips you raw, when sabotage crumbles your old excuses, when healing demands honesty, you can no longer cling to borrowed identities. You're left with the essence of who you are. And from that place, you begin to build a life not out of performance, but out of truth. Becoming who you're meant to be requires courage. The courage to disappoint people who prefer the old version of you. Maybe your family wanted you to follow a safe path, but you feel called to something riskier. Maybe friends expect you to stay small so they feel comfortable, but your heart demands expansion. Maybe the world wants you to conform, but your soul craves freedom. Choosing authenticity means some people will walk away. But the ones who stay, the ones who are drawn to the real you, are worth far more than the approval of the crowd. I've seen this in my own life. Times when I stayed quiet to keep the peace, only to feel empty. Times when I tried to mold myself into what others wanted, only to feel invisible. The moments I finally chose authenticity, even if it meant conflict, even if it meant loss, those were the moments I felt most alive. Because at the end of the day, peace isn't about everyone liking you. Peace is about you liking you. Wiest reminds us that becoming yourself doesn't mean rejecting growth. It means aligning growth with your essence. For example, if you're naturally creative, your path might not be becoming an accountant, even if that job seems secure. If you're naturally nurturing, your fulfillment might not come from cutthroat competition. Alignment is about building a life that feels like home inside your own skin. Another part of becoming who you're meant to be is trusting your intuition. For so long, we outsource our wisdom to parents, teachers, bosses, society. We ignore the quiet pull inside because it doesn't always make logical sense. But intuition is the compass of the soul. It's that subtle knowing that nudges you toward what feels right, even when the map says otherwise. Climbing the mountain strengthens this compass. You start to recognize the difference between fear's voice, which shrieks, "Danger, stay safe," and intuition's voice, which whispers, "This way," even if it scares you. And here's something powerful. Becoming yourself often feels less like adding and more like subtracting. It's not about collecting endless skills, titles, or achievements. It's about peeling away the layers of conditioning, doubt, and pretense until what's left is simple and real. A sculptor doesn't create by adding clay. They reveal by chipping away. Your life is the same. The mountain chips at you until only the truth remains. Of course, this doesn't mean you'll feel done. The idea of a fully finished self is an illusion. We're always becoming, always evolving. The difference is that once you've climbed this far, you're no longer becoming out of fear. You're becoming out of love. Love for life, love for possibility, love for the self you've uncovered. This chapter also explores purpose. Many people chase purpose as if it's a hidden treasure waiting to be found. But Wiest suggests purpose isn't something you discover outside yourself. It's something you live into by being authentically you. Your purpose may not be a single career or mission. It may be the energy you bring, the way you love, the creativity you share. Purpose flows naturally when you stop sabotaging and start aligning. I remember reading a line once. The meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away. That resonates here. When you become who you're meant to be, your life naturally becomes a gift to others. Not because you're trying to impress, but because authenticity inspires. Your courage gives others permission to be courageous. Your healing creates space for others to heal. Your climb lights the way for others on their own mountain. Perhaps the most moving insight of this chapter is this. The mountain was never your enemy. It was your partner. The obstacles, the fears, the struggles, they weren't punishments. They were the training ground. Without them, you wouldn't have discovered your strength, your clarity, your depth. The mountain gave you yourself, and that is the greatest treasure of all. So what does it look like, practically, to live as who you're meant to be? It looks like saying yes when something excites you, even if it scares you. It looks like saying no when something drains you, even if it disappoints others. It looks like creating not for validation, but because creativity is who you are. It looks like resting when you're tired, speaking when you have truth, loving when you feel love, and forgiving because holding grudges weighs you down. It's less about doing and more about being. By the end of this chapter, you realize the summit isn't about conquering the mountain. It's about realizing the mountain, and you were never separate. The mountain was you all along. Your fears, your doubts, your past, your healing, your transformation. Climbing it wasn't about reaching some external peak. It was about uncovering the person who had been waiting inside you the entire time. And so, standing at the top, you don't feel invincible. You feel real. You feel aligned. You feel free. Not because the mountain disappeared, but because you became the kind of person who could climb it. That is what it means to become who you're meant to be. You've faced the mountain. You've seen its storms, its shadows, its steep and brutal edges. You've felt the weight of your past, the pull of fear, the sting of resistance. And you've learned that every stone blocking your path was also a step waiting to be climbed. The mountain was never your enemy. It was your teacher. Every moment of doubt showed you where you needed trust. Every act of sabotage revealed where you needed healing. Every fear pointed toward the life you secretly longed for. And now, standing here, you realize something powerful. The mountain was always you. Climbing it wasn't about conquering the world. It was about becoming yourself. Authentic, whole, unafraid to step forward even when fear walks beside you. The journey doesn't end here. Mountains don't disappear. They change shape. But you've changed too. You are stronger, steadier, clearer. And now, whenever a new mountain rises on the horizon, you'll know the truth. It's not there to stop you. It's there to reveal you. So go. Keep climbing. Keep becoming. The summit isn't out there. It's within you. And it always has been. And hey, if you enjoyed this summary and want more deep dives into books that can shift your mindset and change your life, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it with someone who's facing their own mountain.